Imagine standing at the crossroads of history, where power, ambition, and human emotion collide in ways that shape entire nations. Picture a figure who, despite immense privilege, faced scrutiny, scandal, and the relentless pressures of public life, yet whose choices left an indelible mark on history. Her life was a stage where personal desires clashed with political responsibility, and where every decision, small or monumental, rippled far beyond her own lifetime. This is not just the story of a queen or a historical figure. It is a story about human nature, resilience, and the consequences of influence. From the grandeur of royal courts to the shadows of political intrigue, her journey was anything but ordinary. She navigated a world where appearances mattered as much as actions, where every word, every gesture could alter alliances, spark rumors, or inspire loyalty. Her challenges were not limited to public perception. They were deeply personal. Love, betrayal, trust, and ambition intertwined in ways that forced her to confront her own values, test her moral compass, and make decisions that would forever define her legacy. What makes her story so compelling is not merely the spectacle of her life, but the human truths it uncovers. History remembers the titles, the ceremonies, and the grand moments of power. But behind those lies the quiet, often unseen struggles of someone grappling with responsibility, identity, and consequence. In exploring her life, we gain insight into the very nature of leadership and influence. The sacrifices required, the moral dilemmas faced, and the resilience demanded to navigate a world that watches your every move. And yet, despite scandal and political turbulence, her influence endured. It was not just in the laws she supported or the positions she held, but in the subtle ways she shaped society, culture, and the moral imagination of those who followed. Her story challenges us to rethink what it means to leave a legacy. Is it measured in power, wealth, or titles? Or is it found in the deliberate choices we make, the relationships we nurture, and the ethical paths we choose, even when the cost is personal? By diving into her journey, we uncover lessons that resonate far beyond history books. Her experiences illuminate the complex interplay between personal agency and historical circumstance, reminding us that true influence often arises from the intersection of courage, intellect, and empathy. Every triumph, every scandal, every moment of resilience offers a mirror for our own lives, inviting reflection on how we confront challenges, exercise judgment, and leave our mark on the world. Her life is a testament to the enduring human spirit, a story of tragedy, triumph, and timeless lessons. It is a story that captivates, inspires, and provokes thought, challenging us to examine not only history, but our own capacity for influence, moral courage, and purposeful action. Welcome to our channel, where we explore fascinating stories, uncover hidden histories, and dive deep into the lives that shaped our world. In this video, we'll take you on a journey through the remarkable, turbulent, and unforgettable life of a figure whose legacy continues to inspire and intrigue. In the present day, Princess Eleanor of a small European monarchy stands as a symbol of poise and careful diplomacy. Her days are filled with public appearances, charitable work, and the ever-watchful eyes of the media and her citizens. Yet beneath the glittering facade lies a constant negotiation between personal desires and institutional expectations, a negotiation that mirrors centuries of royal life. The pressures that Eleanor faces are not unique. They are the modern echoes of struggles that have haunted the courts of Europe for generations, hidden behind ornate walls and ceremonial protocol. The glimmering public image, the pageantry, the finely tailored uniforms, and the carefully staged photographs all serve to obscure the private tensions that define royal existence. Even in an era of increased transparency, the burden of expectation and the subtle demands of duty continue to shape every choice and interaction. Long before Eleanor's reign, centuries ago, Queen Frederica navigated a far more constrained environment, one in which her every movement and expression was tightly bound by the expectations of birthright and tradition. Frederica was born into a lineage that carried the weight of dynastic ambition and the lingering shadows of past failures. Her family, celebrated for both military prowess and strategic marriages, positioned her from infancy as a vessel of alliance and continuity. From her earliest days, she was groomed for public scrutiny and ceremonial precision, her accomplishments measured not in personal fulfillment, but in her ability to preserve the family's prestige. The emphasis on decorum, on appearances, and on a meticulously curated reputation shaped not only her public persona, but also her private consciousness. The princesses and queens of Frederica's era were educated with a strict focus on the skills deemed essential for survival and influence in court life. They learned multiple languages, studied history and theology, and mastered the intricate social rituals that governed interactions both within the palace and in broader diplomatic arenas. Music, dance, and fine arts were not merely leisurely pursuits. They were instruments of refinement and social leverage. Every note played on the harpsichord, every gesture in a formal dance, and every essay penned in perfect penmanship reinforced a careful construction of identity that aligned with both familial duty and societal expectation. Yet beneath the polished surface of this education lay an undercurrent of restriction. The cultivation of intellect and talent existed in tandem with the limitation of autonomy, and even the most accomplished young women found themselves navigating a labyrinth of rules and silent judgments. From a young age, Frederica was acutely aware of her unique position. While her peers may have seen privilege and opportunity, she recognized the weight of responsibility attached to every smile, every appearance, every word spoken in public or in the hushed corridors of power. Her lineage, while a source of honor, also imposed a relentless demand for perfection. Her parents, themselves products of dynastic pressures, reinforced the notion that personal desire must often yield to familial strategy. Even minor missteps could have ripple effects, impacting not only her reputation but also alliances between powerful houses and the delicate balance of influence across regions. In such a world, childhood was not simply a time of learning and play, but a period in which the seeds of lifelong restraint and careful self-regulation were planted. Frederica's early promise was apparent to all who observed her. She exhibited an uncommon intelligence and a composure that belied her age. Court historians noted her poise in formal settings, her aptitude in languages, and her early grasp of political nuance. These qualities, while celebrated, also served to heighten the expectations placed upon her. Every achievement was recorded, analyzed, and used to measure her readiness for the roles she was expected to assume. Success brought admiration, but it also brought intensified scrutiny. As her reputation grew, so too did the invisible chains of duty, each expectation layering upon the last until the trajectory of her life seemed to be mapped out before she could truly inhabit it. The social and political structures of the time offered few avenues for genuine personal choice. Marriage, for instance, was seldom about romantic attachment. It was a transaction that could secure alliances, consolidate power, or preserve wealth. As Frederica approached adolescence, she became acutely aware of the negotiations and calculations that would define her matrimonial prospects. Potential suitors were not evaluated solely for their character or affections, but for their political utility, the stability of their lineage, and the strategic advantages they could bring to her family. This realization, while intellectually understood, imposed a silent grief. The knowledge that her personal happiness was subordinate to the broader demands of duty. Even the moments of private reflection were fraught with tension. In the intimacy of her chambers, Frederica could feel the dissonance between her aspirations and the rigid framework of expectations surrounding her. She kept journals, recording observations and thoughts that could never be spoken aloud. In these writings, the contours of her personality emerged: curiosity, creativity, and a profound sensitivity to the world around her. Yet these were the very traits that made her vulnerable within a court defined by protocol and hierarchy. The crown she was destined to inherit promised power and visibility, but at the cost of autonomy, intimacy, and the simple freedom to define herself on her own terms. Her adolescence was marked by a series of carefully orchestrated social appearances, formal lessons, and diplomatic excursions, each designed to cultivate the image of a capable, controlled, and appealing royal figure. Guests from neighboring courts were invited, and the young Frederica was expected to engage with them with charm, wit, and intelligence, while never betraying fatigue, discomfort, or dissent. Even minor lapses, an incorrect response, a moment of hesitation, an unguarded expression, could be seized upon by observers as evidence of weakness or inadequacy. In this environment, psychological resilience became a necessity, as did the development of mechanisms to conceal inner turmoil. Frederica's early experiences reveal a paradox that would define much of her later life: the simultaneous cultivation of extraordinary capabilities and the enforced suppression of personal expression. As she matured into young adulthood, the pressures of her station intensified. Her education, previously a structured preparation, now shifted toward the practicalities of ruling, diplomacy, and ceremonial leadership. She was instructed in the management of estates, the negotiation of treaties, and the subtleties of patronage networks. Each lesson reinforced the dual nature of her position. She was a person of influence, yet also a symbol whose personal agency was continually constrained by tradition, expectation, and political calculation. At court, her every gesture and word were scrutinized, recorded, and interpreted, forming a feedback loop that demanded constant vigilance. It was during these formative years that Frederica's understanding of power and vulnerability deepened. She observed firsthand the fates of those who failed to navigate the treacherous currents of court life, noting the social ostracism, political marginalization, or scandal that could befall even the most carefully prepared individuals. These observations reinforced a cautious approach to alliances, friendships, and emotional engagement. Her instincts for self-preservation developed in tandem with her intellect, forming a delicate balance between strategic insight and the need for emotional restraint. Within this framework, Frederica also grappled with the private dimensions of identity and desire. Her internal life was rich and complex, filled with imaginative explorations of art, literature, and philosophy. Yet these pursuits were constrained by the persistent awareness that visibility in court came at the cost of privacy, that personal indulgences could be interpreted as frivolity or rebellion. Her private aspirations, while vivid and deeply felt, existed largely in isolation, unshared with the wider world. This tension between inner richness and external restriction became a defining feature of her character, one that would shape both her achievements and her sorrows. The broader political environment of Frederica's time also imposed pressures that were beyond the reach of personal effort. European monarchies were enmeshed in a web of alliances, rivalries, and dynastic obligations. Wars, treaties, and succession disputes created a landscape in which the personal could never be disentangled from the political. As a young royal, Frederica's life was inevitably intertwined with these currents, and every decision, even seemingly minor ones, carried potential ramifications for stability, power, and survival. Her understanding of these stakes informed her conduct, sharpening her strategic acumen while also underscoring the precariousness of her position. Amid these challenges, glimpses of Frederica's personal resilience and agency can be discerned. She cultivated relationships with mentors, advisors, and peers who could provide guidance and insight, navigating the court's social and political hierarchies with discretion. She developed a keen sense of observation, noting the motives and tendencies of those around her, and used this awareness to anticipate potential threats or opportunities. Yet, despite these strengths, the emotional cost of sustained vigilance and performance was high. The very qualities that ensured her competence and success also isolated her, creating an enduring sense of solitude that would accompany her throughout life. The intersection of privilege and constraint defines much of Frederica's early life. Her lineage afforded her exceptional opportunities, yet these same circumstances imposed exacting demands. Every skill mastered, every alliance formed, and every public appearance executed flawlessly reinforced the paradoxical nature of royal life. Immense potential coupled with profound limitation. The crown, both literal and symbolic, promised authority and recognition, yet carried with it obligations that could never be fully reconciled with personal desire. Even at an early stage, the first intimations of tragedy began to emerge. The relentless expectation of perfection, combined with the constraints of courtly life, fostered a tension between Frederica's inner world and her external reality. Joy and spontaneity were tempered by duty and observation, and moments of intimacy or genuine expression were rare and fleeting. This dynamic would come to define much of her adult experience, shaping her relationships, her decisions, and her ultimate legacy. As Frederica moved closer to the age of full responsibility, she began to embody the paradox from which her life would be defined. She was outwardly capable, graceful, and admired, yet inwardly burdened by a profound awareness of the compromises and sacrifices demanded by her station. The duality of her existence, power intertwined with limitation, opportunity shadowed by obligation, public visibility countered by private restriction, set the stage for the unfolding drama of her adult life. The foundation laid in these early years of education, observation, and restraint would serve her well in matters of state, yet also sow the seeds of personal melancholy and enduring conflict between duty and desire. Even as historical accounts record her accomplishments, the narrative hints at the emotional and psychological costs incurred along the way. Letters, diaries, and third-party observations reveal traces of longing, regret, and quiet defiance, providing glimpses of the person beneath the ceremonial trappings. Frederica's story is one of remarkable skill and resilience, yet it is also a story of constraint, loss, and the subtle erosion of personal freedom by the very structures that enabled her prominence. By examining Frederica's early life, a pattern emerges that resonates across time. The interplay between public expectation and private aspiration, the careful negotiation of power and vulnerability, and the enduring tension between visibility and autonomy. These elements create a portrait of a young royal navigating a complex world in which every success carries both reward and cost, and every opportunity demands a corresponding sacrifice. The echoes of these dynamics can be seen in modern figures such as Princess Eleanor, whose experiences, while different in context and magnitude, reflect similar pressures, choices, and paradoxes. In tracing the trajectory from early promise to the emergence of public and private tension, one begins to understand the intricate layers of Frederica's life. Each carefully executed gesture, each accomplishment recognized, and each strategic relationship cultivated contributed to a mosaic of expectation, obligation, and constrained agency. Within this framework, moments of genuine self-expression were rare and precious, providing relief and insight, yet always limited by the overarching demands of dynastic duty. Frederica's formative years illustrate the delicate balance between nurturing innate talent and meeting imposed responsibilities. Her education, mentorship, and socialization were all conducted within an environment designed to produce a competent and admired figurehead, yet this process inherently restricted spontaneity, emotional freedom, and personal choice. The resulting tension between capability and constraint, recognition and limitation, became a defining feature of her adult life, influencing not only her actions and decisions, but also the internal landscape of longing, doubt, and resilience that accompanied her. As the contours of her adulthood approached, the stage was set for both triumph and tragedy. The skills honed in childhood and adolescence, observation, strategic thinking, diplomatic acumen, and personal restraint, would equip her to navigate the complex terrain of courtly and political life. Yet these very skills, forged in response to external pressures, would also amplify the emotional cost of the compromises she was required to make. The crown she inherited, both literal and symbolic, carried with it immense responsibility, public admiration, and profound personal limitation. Frederica's early years, rich in promise yet marked by constraint, thus reveal the paradox that would shape her life. Her experiences underscore the ways in which royalty, far from being a simple locus of power or privilege, is a complex interplay of duty, expectation, skill, and personal cost. The lessons embedded in her childhood and adolescence, about resilience, observation, and the negotiation of self within a rigid social framework, provide insight into both the historical realities of monarchy and the enduring human tensions between autonomy and obligation, personal desire and public expectation. In reflecting upon Frederica's lineage and upbringing, one observes not merely the formation of a royal figure, but also the careful architecture of a life defined by both opportunity and limitation. Her early promise, while celebrated, was inseparable from the pressures that accompanied it, creating the conditions for both achievement and sorrow. This paradox, subtle yet profound, illuminates the challenges of navigating a world in which personal identity and public duty are continually entwined, offering a lens through which to understand the intricate dynamics of royal life across centuries. By situating Frederica's story alongside the experiences of modern royals, it becomes evident that the forces shaping her development, expectation, duty, scrutiny, and the negotiation of private versus public self, persist in contemporary contexts. The historical lens enriches our understanding of present challenges, revealing patterns of constraint, resilience, and adaptation that transcend time while retaining their distinctive forms within specific socio-political landscapes. Frederica's early life, therefore, serves not only as a window into the past, but also as a mirror reflecting enduring themes of human aspiration, limitation, and the complex interplay between personal desire and societal obligation. What does it truly mean to wear a crown when the ground beneath the kingdom seems to shift with every passing year, when alliances crumble in secrecy, when the air of celebration masks whispers of dissent? For Frederica, this question was not merely philosophical. It was the lived reality that shaped her every thought and action. The weight of a crown is never measured solely in gold or jewels. It is the invisible gravity of expectation, responsibility, and historical precedent pressing upon the shoulders of its wearer. From the moment she first understood her position, Frederica was acutely aware that her life, like that of those before her, would be defined not only by privilege, but by a ceaseless demand to navigate crises, both public and private, with grace and unwavering composure. Her early years, meticulously guided by tutors and mentors, had prepared her to perform flawlessly under observation, to anticipate the needs of the court, and to internalize the subtle codes of behavior that distinguished competence from scandal. Yet these skills, while essential for survival in the upper echelons of power, could never entirely shield her from the emotional cost of perpetual vigilance. As Frederica matured, the tension between her personal desires and the unyielding demands of dynastic duty became increasingly pronounced. She understood that any lapse, however minor, could have ramifications far beyond her own life, potentially destabilizing the fragile balance of alliances and obligations that sustained her family's influence. In the privacy of her chambers, away from the scrutinizing eyes of courtiers and emissaries, Frederica wrestled with the paradox of her existence. She was endowed with the authority and visibility that many might envy, yet her autonomy was circumscribed by an intricate web of protocol, expectation, and social convention. Every decision carried both immediate and long-term consequences, and each public appearance was a carefully calibrated performance designed to convey competence, confidence, and dignity. The crown she was destined to wear represented power in its most visible form, yet it exacted a toll in silence, isolation, and the constant need for self-restraint. The political landscape surrounding Frederica was one of ceaseless fluctuation. Kingdoms rose and fell, treaties were forged and broken, and the ambitions of neighboring rulers often collided in ways that placed the stability of her own realm at risk. From a young age, she observed the machinations of ministers, advisors, and foreign dignitaries, learning to interpret subtle gestures, coded language, and the nuances of ceremonial behavior. These observations were not merely academic, they were practical lessons in survival. She recognized that power was not merely inherited, but continuously negotiated, and that the illusion of control could be as important as actual authority. Frederica's personal development was inseparable from these external pressures. The cultivation of intellect, emotional acuity, and social poise was not simply a matter of refinement, but a necessity for navigating a world in which misjudgment could be catastrophic. Education in literature, history, diplomacy, and the arts was complemented by rigorous training in comportment, etiquette, and the management of public perception. Through these lessons, she internalized a dual awareness. She was both an individual with her own thoughts and ambitions, and a symbol whose actions were constantly interpreted, evaluated, and at times politicized. The balance between personal agency and symbolic representation was delicate, requiring constant negotiation and self-discipline. As her responsibilities expanded, Frederica encountered the stark realities of the court's social hierarchies. The intricate network of influence and obligation demanded careful cultivation of alliances and relationships. Courtiers observed and recorded her every movement, while foreign envoys evaluated her conduct for signs of political alignment or susceptibility. Even private interactions were rarely exempt from scrutiny, as rumor and interpretation flowed through the palace corridors with relentless speed. In this environment, discretion and strategic judgment became paramount, and personal sentiments were often subordinated to the greater demands of duty and reputation. The personal costs of these pressures were manifold. Frederica experienced the isolation inherent in a life so publicly mediated, the difficulty of forming genuine friendships, and the challenge of sustaining emotional intimacy in a context where vulnerability could be exploited. Her letters, diaries, and private reflections reveal a keen sensitivity to the paradoxes she navigated, a yearning for connection and self-expression constrained by the demands of a life that was never entirely her own. The juxtaposition of visibility and solitude, power and limitation, public admiration and private restriction, defined much of her inner experience and shaped the contours of her emotional landscape. Marriage, often presented as a solution to dynastic challenges, introduced further complexity. In Frederica's era, matrimonial alliances were rarely about romantic fulfillment. They were transactions of political utility, carefully negotiated to secure stability, consolidate influence, or strengthen claims to territory. The selection of a spouse involved consideration of lineage, temperament, and diplomatic advantage, often leaving little room for personal choice or affection. Frederica confronted this reality with a combination of pragmatism and emotional restraint, aware that her happiness was inseparable from the political and social imperatives of her station. Yet even within these constraints, she sought ways to cultivate understanding, respect, and, where possible, genuine companionship, demonstrating a resilience that would characterize her approach to the broader challenges of life in the palace. In addition to marital expectations, Frederica's engagement with governance required constant attention to matters of state. She was instructed in financial management, legal oversight, and the negotiation of complex political relationships. Decisions regarding taxation, military organization, and judicial administration could affect the lives of thousands, underscoring the tangible consequences of leadership. In these arenas, competence and foresight were critical, yet so too were subtlety, diplomacy, and the ability to maintain appearances of unity and authority even in the face of disagreement or uncertainty. The burden of responsibility was relentless, leaving little opportunity for error and heightening the psychological pressures of daily life. Health and personal well-being, while not absent from royal life, were often subordinated to ceremonial and political demands. The regimen of public appearances, formal engagements, and diplomatic receptions placed significant strain on Frederica's physical and emotional resources. Sleep and privacy were precious commodities, and the need for constant vigilance exacerbated the challenges of maintaining both mental and physical equilibrium. Despite these constraints, she demonstrated a capacity for endurance and resilience, drawing upon inner reserves of discipline and focus to navigate the unyielding demands of her position. The intersection of public scrutiny and private experience also revealed the complexities of reputation management. Rumors, slights, and the judgments of observers could shape perceptions of capability, character, and legitimacy. Frederica understood that perception often rivaled reality in determining influence and authority. Consequently, she cultivated a careful persona, attentive to the subtleties of gesture, expression, and speech. Her behavior was informed by an acute awareness of context, audience, and consequence, creating a form of social intelligence that allowed her to navigate potential crises while maintaining an image of stability and control. Education, observation, and careful conduct, however, could not eliminate the emotional realities of isolation and constrained agency. Frederica's reflections reveal a persistent tension between the roles she was expected to fulfill and the individual desires she harbored. The pursuit of knowledge, art, and intellectual engagement provided both enrichment and solace. Yet these pursuits were conducted within boundaries defined by protocol, expectation, and social norms. Moments of genuine freedom and self-expression were rare, intensifying both their value and the sense of deprivation that accompanied the broader demands of court life. As Frederica matured, the paradox of her position became ever more evident. She possessed remarkable influence, visibility, and capacity, yet the exercise of these qualities was inseparable from constraint, negotiation, and the continual management of perception. The crown, while a symbol of authority and recognition, carried with it profound responsibilities and limitations, creating a life in which success and sorrow were intimately intertwined. Every public victory or accomplishment was mirrored by a private awareness of compromise, and every strategic maneuver was shadowed by the constraints imposed by duty and expectation. The interplay between personal identity and symbolic role defined much of Frederica's approach to leadership and social engagement. She developed a nuanced understanding of human behavior, a keen sense of observation, and the ability to anticipate the reactions of others. These skills allowed her to navigate complex political and social landscapes with acumen, yet they also reinforced the persistent tension between genuine self-expression and the demands of visibility. The duality of her experience, the simultaneous possession of agency and limitation, power and restriction, admiration and isolation, underscores the central paradox of her life, that prominence and privilege can coexist with profound personal constraint. Frederica's story also illustrates the intergenerational nature of royal pressures. She inherited not only titles, lands, and responsibilities, but also the psychological legacy of her ancestors, including expectations, reputations, and unresolved tensions. Each decision she made was informed by this lineage, and the successes or failures of her predecessors served as both guidance and warning. The historical continuity of monarchy imposed both stability and constraint, providing a framework for action while circumscribing the range of personal freedom available. The burden of leadership was compounded by the ever-present scrutiny of the public and the court. Every act, statement, and appearance was subject to interpretation, often in ways that Frederica could neither control nor predict. The need to maintain dignity, project authority, and preserve alliances demanded continuous attention and strategic foresight. Even private moments of reflection or informal engagement were shaded by awareness of potential observation or gossip, limiting the capacity for spontaneous action and reinforcing the isolation inherent in her role. Amid these pressures, Frederica sought avenues for self-expression and intellectual engagement. She pursued studies, correspondence, and cultural activities that allowed her to explore personal interests within socially acceptable boundaries. These pursuits, while limited in scope, provided both intellectual stimulation and emotional sustenance, enabling her to cultivate a sense of identity and purpose alongside the obligations imposed by her station. Yet even these spaces of relative freedom were constrained, underscoring the persistent tension between autonomy and duty that defined her life. The challenges Frederica faced were not solely structural or political. They were also profoundly psychological. The constant requirement to navigate perception, anticipate consequence, and manage both personal and public expectations created an environment of sustained tension. She developed coping mechanisms, including careful self-reflection, strategic planning, and selective engagement, to maintain equilibrium in the face of relentless pressure. These strategies illustrate both resilience and adaptability, yet they also highlight the enduring emotional cost of a life defined by visibility, responsibility, and constraint. Every decision Frederica made, from the management of estates to the cultivation of social alliances, was influenced by the intricate interplay of power, expectation, and personal desire. The crown she bore was more than an emblem of authority. It was a framework within which her life unfolded, shaping opportunities, limiting choices, and defining the contours of both public and private experience. The paradox of her existence, simultaneously empowered and constrained, visible and isolated, admired and burdened, remained a constant presence, shaping her actions, relationships, and inner life. Frederica's journey from a German princess to the queen of a land scarred by conflict was neither linear nor gentle. Born into a fractured royal house in Germany, she grew up amidst the reverberations of political instability, familial expectation, and social scrutiny. Her early environment was defined by the complex interplay of lineage and national identity. Though she belonged to a noble family, the internal divisions and precarious alliances of the German principalities meant that status alone could not shield her from the undercurrents of tension and uncertainty that shaped daily life. Within this setting, she learned early that appearances and decorum were essential, that every gesture could be interpreted politically, and that childhood, in the traditional sense, was often subordinated to preparation for the obligations of dynastic life. Her education was comprehensive, but also intensely demanding, focused on the cultivation of intellect, linguistic skill, and social grace. Frederica was encouraged to understand diplomacy, history, and governance, even as she was instructed in the subtler arts of etiquette, perception management, and symbolic comportment. She internalized the implicit lesson that knowledge and awareness were not merely academic pursuits, but practical tools for navigating a world in which alliances shifted and power was fragile. This foundation would later serve her in the complex political terrain of Greece, where the responsibilities of monarchy intersected with the realities of a nation emerging from turmoil. The arranged marriage to Paul of Greece was emblematic of the political function of royal unions in the early 20th century. It was a marriage less of affection than of calculated alignment, designed to secure influence, stabilize relations between nations, and strengthen claims to legitimacy. For Frederica, this meant that personal choice and desire were largely secondary to considerations of duty and expediency. While she may have harbored private hopes for companionship and connection, these were filtered through the lens of dynastic expectation. Her approach to the union was informed by a sense of pragmatic acceptance, an understanding that the success of the marriage would be measured not solely by personal fulfillment, but by the broader consequences for the royal house and the nation she was to serve. From the outset, the marriage required adaptation to a new cultural, political, and social context. Greece, with its distinct traditions, history, and social dynamics, presented both opportunity and challenge. Frederica was tasked not only with adjusting to a new country, but also with embodying a symbol of continuity and stability for a monarchy that faced both internal skepticism and external pressures. She navigated these demands with a careful blend of diplomacy, resilience, and sensitivity to perception. Her early efforts to engage with Greek society, understand local customs, and present herself as a legitimate and capable consort laid the groundwork for her eventual influence and the public role she would assume. The outbreak of war introduced a period of unprecedented adversity. The German occupation of Europe, followed by the turmoil of World War II, disrupted the lives of royals and common citizens alike. Frederica and Paul were forced into exile, a circumstance that tested the limits of endurance, adaptability, and fortitude. During this period, maintaining a semblance of royal dignity was an ongoing challenge. They faced displacement, uncertainty, and the constant pressure to embody stability, even as their immediate surroundings were marked by fear, deprivation, and the loss of security. The experience of exile was formative, shaping Frederica's understanding of vulnerability, resilience, and the transient nature of power. Throughout the war, Frederica's personal fortitude was intertwined with the broader struggle of her adopted country. She witnessed firsthand the hardships endured by civilians, the erosion of social structures, and the human cost of conflict. These experiences left an indelible mark on her perspective, fostering a combination of empathy, strategic awareness, and an acute sense of the stakes inherent in leadership. Even in exile, she remained attentive to the symbolic function of her role, understanding that the monarchy's legitimacy depended in part on its continued visibility, moral presence, and ability to convey hope to a population grappling with displacement, fear, and uncertainty. The return to Greece after the cessation of hostilities revealed a landscape transformed by both war and internal strife. Cities lay in ruin, infrastructure was devastated, and political tensions simmered, threatening the fragile equilibrium necessary for the monarchy's restoration. Frederica and Paul faced the daunting task of reintegrating into a society that had endured immense suffering and upheaval. Their challenge was not only to restate ceremonial authority, but to engage with practical governance, support recovery efforts, and foster a sense of national cohesion. The responsibilities were immense, as the physical reconstruction of towns and institutions was mirrored by the need to rebuild trust, legitimacy, and public confidence. In assuming her role as queen, Frederica drew upon the lessons of her early life, the experiences of exile, and the strategies honed in navigating both domestic and international royal networks. She engaged with governmental officials, community leaders, and foreign representatives with a focus on diplomacy, advocacy, and the projection of stability. Her presence was intended to serve as both a symbol of continuity and an active agent of reconciliation, addressing the practical realities of a kingdom seeking to recover from division and trauma. This balancing act required both personal resilience and strategic acuity, as every initiative, public appearance, and private negotiation could have repercussions for the monarchy's standing and the nation's cohesion. The period of rebuilding was marked by a mixture of achievement and persistent challenge. While some stability was restored, the underlying fractures within society, politics, and even the royal institution itself demanded ongoing attention. Frederica's approach combined pragmatism with a keen awareness of her symbolic role. She participated in philanthropic initiatives, engaged with social programs, and supported efforts to promote cultural and educational development, recognizing that legitimacy extended beyond formal authority to encompass perception, trust, and the lived experience of citizens. The weight of these responsibilities often contrasted sharply with the personal constraints imposed by public life, reinforcing the recurring tension between individual agency and institutional expectation. Throughout these tumultuous years, Frederica's personal life remained deeply intertwined with her public role. The marriage to Paul, while politically motivated, required ongoing negotiation, collaboration, and mutual adaptation. Both faced pressures not only from the public and political arenas, but also from the persistent scrutiny of court circles, media, and international observers. Their partnership, therefore, operated within layers of formal obligation, symbolic representation, and private compromise. Frederica's capacity to maintain composure, exercise judgment, and navigate the complexities of marital, familial, and political obligations was continually tested, reflecting the broader challenges inherent in her position as a queen in a nation recovering from war and civil unrest. The social and cultural adjustments demanded by her position were equally significant. Frederica needed to cultivate an understanding of Greek traditions, history, and expectations, while simultaneously representing a modernizing monarchy capable of fostering progress and stability. This dual responsibility required an acute awareness of the interplay between heritage and adaptation, as well as the ability to engage meaningfully with diverse constituencies, from political elites to everyday citizens. Her efforts to embody both continuity and relevance highlight the nuanced demands placed upon royal figures navigating post-war reconstruction and evolving national identity. Frederica's experiences during these years also underscore the emotional dimension of her responsibilities. The weight of expectation, the pressures of visibility, and the constant negotiation of perception could not be mitigated by formal authority alone. Her resilience, judgment, and capacity for strategic empathy were continually exercised, as she sought to reconcile the demands of monarchy with the human realities of suffering, loss, and hope. The personal toll of these responsibilities, while often invisible to the public eye, formed an essential aspect of her lived experience and shaped both her approach to governance and her broader understanding of leadership. The process of re-establishing the monarchy was further complicated by the evolving political landscape. Greece, emerging from war and internal conflict, was a nation grappling with the interplay of ideology, regional interests, and social reconstruction. Frederica and Paul had to navigate these complexities while maintaining the symbolic integrity of the monarchy and the practical functionality of the royal household. Diplomatic engagement, ceremonial representation, and strategic counsel were all components of this multifaceted role, requiring constant attention to both immediate concerns and long-term implications. Amid these external pressures, Frederica's personal character and agency became increasingly central to her public persona. She demonstrated an ability to balance diplomacy with decisiveness, visibility with discretion, and empathy with the necessity of maintaining authority. The cultivation of these qualities was not purely performative. It was informed by lived experience, reflection, and a deep understanding of the interdependence between personal comportment and public perception. In this sense, her life illustrates the intricate relationship between the psychological, social, and political dimensions of monarchy, revealing the human complexity beneath the trappings of title and ceremony. The harrowing experiences of war, exile, and national rebuilding left an enduring imprint on Frederica's perspective and approach to her responsibilities. She recognized that the challenges of monarchy were inseparable from the social, economic, and political realities of the nation she served. Her efforts to foster stability, support recovery, and embody continuity were informed by both historical awareness and lived experience, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of the interplay between personal action, institutional expectation, and societal need. The return to Greece, while a moment of formal restoration, marked the beginning of an intensive period of active engagement with the pressing issues of a nation scarred by conflict and division. Throughout this process, Frederica's role was continually negotiated between private experience and public duty. The symbolic weight of queenship was inseparable from the practical demands of governance, representation, and leadership. She had to navigate competing expectations, anticipate consequences, and maintain equilibrium in a context of persistent scrutiny and uncertainty. The challenges were compounded by the enduring tension between personal desire and institutional obligation, a duality that shaped both her public actions and private reflections. The navigation of these complexities required not only intelligence and skill, but also endurance, adaptability, and a nuanced understanding of human behavior. Her ascent, marked by both opportunity and adversity, reveals the paradox of monarchy: the simultaneous possession of influence, visibility, and formal authority alongside the constraints of expectation, scrutiny, and responsibility. Frederica's life exemplifies this tension, as she exercised agency within circumscribed parameters, sought personal fulfillment amid structural constraints, and pursued stability and legitimacy in a landscape shaped by historical, political, and social upheaval. Each stage of her journey, from the fractured German principality of her birth to the war-torn streets of post-conflict Greece, demonstrates the interplay of personal fortitude, strategic acumen, and the enduring human costs of living under the persistent gaze of history and society. Frederica's years as queen unfolded in a nation emerging from occupation and torn apart by civil conflict. Her position required her to be both a visible emblem of stability and a figure who could endure the private strain that came with constant scrutiny. Greece was in the process of physical reconstruction, but the deeper challenge lay in restoring faith in the monarchy. The institution had been weakened by years of exile, political division, and uncertainty over its legitimacy. Every action she took, from ceremonial appearances to philanthropic work, was judged in light of this fragile trust. A single misstep could be interpreted not merely as a personal failing, but as a sign of wider institutional weakness. From the outset, Frederica faced the challenge of reconciling two demands: the need to act with decisive authority and the need to exercise caution. She was expected to be active in public life while also embodying the dignity and restraint of the crown. Her engagement with social welfare projects was one of the most visible aspects of her work. She sought to address the suffering that persisted after the war by promoting charitable programs, visiting communities, and lending royal support to humanitarian causes. At the same time, she maintained the ceremonial presence required to signal continuity and order in a country still defining its post-war identity. The public image of stability that Frederica projected came at the cost of personal strain. Behind formal appearances lay the reality of exhaustion, anxiety, and the constant awareness that her conduct was never simply personal. Every gesture, speech, or initiative had symbolic implications for the monarchy's survival. This knowledge created a permanent pressure to self-monitor, to speak and act in ways that would strengthen rather than undermine her position. Criticism was inevitable. Many appreciated her charitable work and interest in education, yet others saw her visibility as overreach. Detractors accused her of extravagance or of interfering in political affairs. These tensions were aggravated by the growth of Republican sentiment and by an environment in which the monarchy's future was openly debated. Newspapers, political groups, and members of the public often questioned royal spending, the appropriateness of certain initiatives, and the relevance of a monarchy in a modernizing, democratic Greece. The line between advocacy and interference was never fixed, and perceptions shifted with the political climate. To manage this, Frederica relied on emotional control, strategic patience, and careful communication. She avoided public displays of frustration or anger that could be seized upon by critics. She understood that authority in such a volatile environment depended on the appearance of composure as much as on formal power. Her reign was defined by this interplay between perception and reality. The practical consequences of public opinion were inseparable from the ceremonial expectations of the crown. Frederica's role as mother carried significance beyond her private life. Her children, most notably Constantine, the future king, and Sophia, later Queen of Spain, were central to the monarchy's image. Their upbringing was not only a personal matter, but also a public one. They were symbols of continuity, and their conduct reflected on the institution. She aimed to prepare them for roles in which tradition, political awareness, and personal discipline would be essential. This meant giving them a strong education while fostering qualities such as resilience and empathy. She worked to instill an understanding of ceremonial duties and the historical responsibilities of royalty. Every public appearance they made was scrutinized, and any perceived error could spark criticism not only of the children but also of her parenting. The tension between protecting them from the pressures of public life and preparing them for their eventual roles was constant. Frederica's hopes for her children's success were linked to the monarchy's legitimacy. A well-regarded heir could reinforce the institution's stability, but she knew that political upheaval or public opinion could undo even the most careful preparation. The post-war political climate was marked by ideological divisions, regional tensions, and the deep scars of civil war. In this environment, Frederica's efforts to present herself as a unifying figure were complicated. Her presence could be reassuring to some, but provoke suspicion in others. Allegations of partisanship or undue influence were never far away. As a highly visible institution, the monarchy was a convenient target for criticism. Frederica had to constantly weigh the risks of taking action against the risks of doing nothing. Her strategy was to combine symbolic acts with practical engagement. She supported cultural events, attended public ceremonies, and cultivated ties with civic and political leaders. She also lent her name and presence to educational and charitable initiatives, understanding that the monarchy's relevance depended on visible contributions to national life. Each decision involved calculation. A misinterpreted gesture could be amplified by the press, opponents, or shifting public moods. At the same time, inactivity could be read as detachment. This tension, between the need to be seen and the risk of being misunderstood, was a defining feature of her public life. Her marriage to King Paul combined personal and political dimensions. As partners, they navigated the pressures of public expectation and the responsibilities of the monarchy. Their relationship unfolded under constant observation, with little space for purely private interaction. Public appearances had to convey unity, while any hint of discord could be magnified into political significance. Her relationships within the family, especially with her children, were similarly shaped by public demands. She provided private guidance while recognizing that their development was also a matter of state interest. In this context, the boundaries between family life and official duty were often blurred. Affection, discipline, and preparation for leadership were all carried out under the gaze of the press and the public. Frederica's survival in such a charged environment depended on a form of endurance that was both outward and inward. Publicly, she had to appear confident and composed. Privately, she had to preserve her own capacity to function despite fatigue, criticism, and the weight of responsibility. Her endurance was not passive. It required active adaptation to changing circumstances, political shifts, media scrutiny, and evolving public expectations. She understood the symbolic dimension of her role, but also recognized the practical need to engage with real social and political issues. This blend of ceremonial and pragmatic action was a constant in her reign. Greece's traditions and religious life played an important role in Frederica's work. She engaged with the Orthodox Church, participated in religious ceremonies, and supported cultural projects that emphasized national identity. These efforts were intended to reinforce the monarchy's connection to the people and to the historical fabric of the country. Cultural involvement was not simply a matter of protocol. Frederica recognized that the monarchy's legitimacy depended on being seen as an authentic part of the nation's life. At the same time, modernization and social change meant that cultural expectations were shifting, and aligning the monarchy with these evolving standards required careful judgment. The monarchy's dual role, as guardian of tradition and potential agent of modernization, was a source of constant tension. Public opinion was divided over which role should dominate. Frederica navigated this divide by emphasizing dignity and continuity, while also promoting initiatives that addressed contemporary needs. This balancing act was difficult. Efforts at modernization could be portrayed as compromising tradition, while adherence to ceremony could be dismissed as outdated. She worked within these contradictions, understanding that the monarchy's survival depended on its ability to adapt without losing its symbolic essence. Royal spending and political involvement were frequent points of contention. In a country still recovering economically, even modest royal expenses could attract criticism. Political interventions, whether real or perceived, were subject to debate and could reinforce Republican arguments. Frederica's visibility in these matters was both an asset and a liability. Her willingness to take initiative helped keep the monarchy present in public life, but it also made her an easy focus for discontent. She was aware that in such an environment, perception could matter as much as fact, and she worked to limit opportunities for damaging narratives to take hold. In Frederica's life, public duty, political engagement, and family responsibility were not separate domains. Each influenced the others. Decisions about public appearances could affect her family's image. Political developments could shape the monarchy's ability to function effectively. Family milestones and challenges often had public consequences. This interconnectedness meant that her work as queen was as much about managing relationships and perceptions as it was about formal authority. Success in one area could be undermined by difficulties in another, and every decision carried potential risks across multiple spheres. Over time, Frederica's reign came to be defined by the way she managed competing pressures. The need to be visible without overreaching, to modernize without alienating traditionalists, and to fulfill her role as mother while meeting public expectations. She demonstrated strategic judgment, emotional resilience, and adaptability, but also faced enduring criticism and political opposition. Her legacy is not one of unchallenged triumph, but of sustained negotiation with the realities of her time. She preserved the monarchy through a period of volatility, though not without controversy. She invested in cultural, charitable, and educational projects that reflected her belief in the monarchy's role as a unifying institution. Yet she could not eliminate the divisions in public opinion or the political forces that questioned the institution's place in a democratic Greece. Frederica's experience shows that monarchy is not simply a matter of titles and ceremonies. It is a lived reality in which personal endurance, family responsibility, and political acumen are inseparable. The pressures she faced were unrelenting, and the need for constant vigilance left little room for personal freedom. The strength she displayed was matched by the weight of the burdens she carried. Her story illustrates how the human side of leadership, emotions, relationships, and private struggles shapes public outcomes. It also shows how resilience is often about persistence under strain rather than the absence of difficulty. Frederica's years as queen in post-war Greece were marked by complexity. She navigated a nation struggling to recover, a monarchy under scrutiny, and a family life conducted in public view. Her reign required her to be a visible symbol of continuity, an active participant in national life, and a private individual managing personal and familial demands. She faced criticism, political challenges, and the unpredictability of public opinion. Yet she maintained her role through adaptability, careful judgment, and a sustained commitment to both her family and the institution she represented. Her life reflects the intertwined nature of personal and institutional roles in leadership, the constant negotiation between tradition and change, and the enduring challenge of meeting public expectation while preserving private integrity. Frederica's legacy lies not in the absence of conflict, but in her ability to endure and act within it, shaping the monarchy's course in a time of national transformation. Frederica's life in her later years reflected the complex intersection between the visible responsibilities of monarchy and the private, often hidden, realities of personal struggle. She had been a public figure for most of her adult life, and the years following the turbulent post-war period tested her in ways that few outside her immediate circle could truly understand. The challenges she faced were not isolated events, but part of an ongoing process of adjustment, resilience, and self-definition. Public scrutiny, political change, health problems, and personal loss formed an interwoven set of pressures that demanded constant navigation. Even as the political climate shifted and her formal influence evolved, the demands placed upon her, both as an individual and as the symbolic embodiment of an institution, remained unrelenting. The strain of carrying these responsibilities was heightened by the fact that her life had little space for privacy. She lived with the knowledge that her actions, expressions, and even her silences would be interpreted through the prism of public expectation. Health played a central role in shaping her later years. Accounts from those close to her suggest that she struggled with recurring ailments, the nature of which sometimes remained vague to the public. Fatigue, recurring illnesses, and bouts of physical vulnerability became part of the rhythm of her life. Whether the exact details were known or merely speculated upon, the perception of her health became intertwined with her public role. Rumors about her condition circulated freely, often without regard for accuracy, and each appearance in public was scrutinized for signs of strength or weakness. For someone in her position, showing signs of illness could be interpreted as weakness in leadership, even if the role she occupied was largely ceremonial by this stage. This meant that illness was not only a private matter but a public one, requiring careful management of appearances and activity. Maintaining an image of composure became as important as tending to her physical well-being, and the two often came into conflict. Rest and recovery, though necessary, were difficult to prioritize when the expectations of visibility were so entrenched. The emotional cost of these years was no less significant. As the monarchy adapted to a changing society, Frederica found herself responsible not only for preserving the dignity and relevance of the institution, but also for ensuring cohesion within her own family. She understood that in the public imagination, her family was more than a private household. It was a symbol of continuity and stability. The education, conduct, and unity of her children became matters of national interest, adding an extra layer of pressure to what might otherwise have been private concerns. Her role as mother was therefore inseparable from her role as queen and later as a former queen. Every parental decision, every public interaction with her children, could be read as a reflection of the monarchy's future. Personal loss deepened the challenges of this period. As a wife and mother, she endured the pain of seeing her loved ones confronted with trials of their own, many of which were intensified by the glare of public attention. There was little opportunity for private grief. Even moments of mourning were often played out under the gaze of the press and the public. The deaths of close friends, trusted advisors, and members of her extended family stripped away some of the support networks she had relied upon for stability. These absences left her feeling the weight of isolation, despite her public visibility. The public's focus on her as a figurehead often overlooked the reality that she, too, experienced loss and vulnerability like anyone else. Every bereavement carried both personal pain and, in some cases, political consequences, as the monarchy's image was bound up with the health and unity of its members. In the midst of these challenges, Frederica became a focal point for public frustration. At times, she was cast as a scapegoat for broader social and political discontent. As Greece moved through a period of modernization and continued to reckon with the legacies of war and political division, the monarchy was not immune from criticism. As a highly visible and sometimes outspoken figure, Frederica was an easy target for those who wanted to express dissatisfaction with the institution or with the state of the nation. Criticism ranged from specific grievances to sweeping condemnations of her character, motives, and decisions. Some of these criticisms were grounded in reality, but many were exaggerated or entirely unfounded. In the court of public opinion, perception often outweighed fact, and her gender and visibility ensured that she would be subjected to a level of scrutiny that her male counterparts could sometimes avoid. While some political figures could operate discreetly behind the scenes, Frederica's position placed her in front of the public eye, where every gesture could be interpreted as political commentary. Faced with this combination of pressures, she sought ways to create meaning and stability beyond the immediate demands of public life. Over time, she turned more deliberately toward intellectual pursuits. She developed a sustained interest in philosophy, not as a passing curiosity, but as a serious engagement with moral and ethical questions. This intellectual focus became a source of personal refuge, offering her a space where she could think independently of political developments and public opinion. Through philosophical study, she could examine human nature, leadership, and morality from a perspective that was both deeply personal and broadly relevant. It provided a framework for understanding her own experiences, reconciling the demands of duty with her private convictions. In this way, intellectual exploration became a form of resilience, one that complemented the emotional and physical endurance required by her public role. Her focus on philosophy and self-reflection also influenced her approach to her family. She remained committed to the education and moral guidance of her children, understanding that their roles extended beyond the private sphere. She encouraged not only academic learning, but also the cultivation of character, judgment, and perspective. In shaping the next generation, she was acutely aware that the personal development of her children would have institutional implications. Their behavior, choices, and public image would affect perceptions of the monarchy's relevance and credibility. Guiding them through these responsibilities was a role in which she retained a measure of control, even as other aspects of her influence were constrained by circumstance. As her public engagement became more selective, Frederica learned to navigate the media and public opinion with greater caution. She recognized the importance of managing perception and developed strategies for balancing visibility with discretion. This was not an abandonment of public life, but a refinement of her role within it. By choosing her appearances and statements carefully, she could shape the narrative around her to some extent and shield herself from unnecessary controversy. This approach reflected a growing awareness that influence could be exercised without constant exposure, and that preserving dignity sometimes required deliberate distance. Her later years brought an increasing awareness of the need for balance between solitude and engagement. She valued periods of withdrawal for rest and reflection, knowing that constant exposure could erode emotional resilience. At the same time, she maintained a presence in select arenas where her influence could be meaningful, whether through family matters, cultural engagements, or carefully chosen public appearances. This balance allowed her to sustain her energy and maintain a sense of control over her life, rather than being wholly reactive to events. Her health challenges, recurring grief, and the constant negotiation of public expectation demanded a comprehensive approach to resilience. She addressed these pressures not only through rest and medical care, but also through mental and spiritual preparation. The pursuit of philosophy and the cultivation of her inner life gave her tools for understanding and managing adversity. She recognized that resilience was not simply a matter of endurance. It required active cultivation through reflection, perspective, and a conscious alignment between personal values and outward action. The enduring symbolism of her position added another layer to her experience. Regardless of political change or personal circumstance, she remained a representative of a historical institution. This meant that public interpretations of her life were often shaped by broader narratives about monarchy, tradition, and national identity, sometimes with little regard for her personal reality. Navigating this dual existence, being both an individual and a symbol, required an ongoing effort to separate external perception from internal truth. Her ability to do so was a mark of what might be called adaptive intelligence, a capacity to reconcile competing demands without losing a coherent sense of self. Her philosophical pursuits also provided a means of integrating her personal hardships into a broader understanding of human experience. By engaging with questions about suffering, ethics, and the meaning of life, she could place her own struggles within a larger context. This perspective reduced the sense of isolation that public life could create and reinforced her ability to act with empathy and foresight. Her reflections influenced her approach to leadership within the family and her interactions with others in public life, allowing her to respond to challenges with measured judgment rather than impulsive reaction. Even as she sought intellectual and personal fulfillment, Frederica remained conscious of the narratives that surrounded her. The tendency to view her as a lightning rod for criticism did not disappear, and she adapted by refining her approach to public engagement. She cultivated alliances, managed her public image with care, and emphasized qualities such as composure, clarity, and consistency. These strategies reflected an understanding that influence was as much about perception as about formal authority, and that sustaining credibility required both patience and self-discipline. Her commitment to legacy became increasingly evident. Beyond her immediate role as mother, she saw herself as responsible for transmitting values and principles that would help preserve the integrity of the monarchy. This effort included not only arranging for the formal education of her children, but also instilling in them a sense of responsibility, ethical awareness, and historical perspective. She recognized that the survival of the institution depended not just on political circumstances, but also on the conduct and character of its representatives. The interplay between solitude and engagement became more pronounced in these years. Frederica appreciated the restorative power of privacy, using it as a time for reflection and the renewal of inner resources. Yet she also understood that her influence required some degree of visibility. By choosing her engagements carefully, she could focus her efforts where they would be most effective and avoid unnecessary exposure to the volatility of public opinion. Her later life shows that health, personal loss, and public expectation can be managed through a combination of inner cultivation and strategic action. She approached these pressures with an integrated strategy that included philosophical reflection, careful public engagement, and a sustained focus on family. These elements together allowed her to maintain a degree of autonomy in a role that was often defined by external forces. In doing so, she demonstrated that leadership, even in largely symbolic positions, involves an ongoing negotiation between personal authenticity and public responsibility. In her final years of public relevance, Frederica had become a figure who combined discretion with selective influence. She showed that it was possible to maintain dignity and purpose despite the erosion of formal power and the persistence of public criticism. Her example suggests that resilience in such a role is less about the absence of difficulty than about the skillful integration of experience, reflection, and action. By balancing these elements, she was able to preserve a coherent sense of self while continuing to shape the environment around her, both within her family and in the public imagination.